I'll do a real quick review, just in case, because we don't want anybody to miss anything. Okay, so we're working on our barn picture. We did our sky first, which I put in a very light wash of water, just water. And then I mixed a very pale blue, mixed with a little bit of black, and just dragged that through the water, just so I wouldn't have a plain white paper sky. While that was still wet, I went down and put in my foliage way in the background. And I did that by mixing burnt umber and black and dropping that into the horizon line, allowed that to blend into the wet water, put a little bit of salt on that. And then while that was drying, I came down, wet my snow area because I didn't want plain white flat snow. So I put some water there. I mixed some indigo blue and a little bit of black, dragged it through just to give some dimension to that and salted that. Now I'm going to go up and I'm going to work on my barn. And where I'm working on my barn, I am going to do dry brushing first. Okay, dry brushing is when you take your brush, you lay it on its side, and you just drag it in the direction you want. Okay, so I'm going to start. You can start in the middle, you can start on an end, it really doesn't matter. But I want to go vertically. I don't want to go horizontally because my boards are vertical. I'm laying my brush on its side and I'm dragging it down. This is going to create some rough looking wood when I start to paint it in. So I am just dry brushing now. Again, it's vertical. You want it to be vertical because your boards are vertical. You're going in the direction of your boards. You can change up your color, but this is just going to act as like a base for our boards. Okay. And I'm going to do that the whole way across. I'm not doing it where there's a window. This is what's going to make your wood on your barn look old and weathered. And it will show through when you start to put your paint on. It's important also that when you're doing this, that you do it straight when you're doing your vertical line. You don't want lines that go off in one direction because, as I said, this will show through. And you don't want your boards to look crooked because that will definitely make you start to tilt your head when you're looking at the picture. After a while, you kind of get used to it and you don't have to, but if you want, you can just leave your hand sit on the table and move the brush versus moving your whole hand, whatever is most comfortable for you. The rest of the barn here. So now I have this nice and dry brushed. It's not as important dry brushing the side of the barn because you're really not looking at it head on. And you really won't notice the texturing of the boards. But just to keep things all even, I'll go ahead and just dry brush it at the very beginning a little bit. Okay, so now I have to allow that to dry, because if you put your wash of color on over your dry brushing and your dry brushing is still wet, it's just going to dissipate into the wet paint and then you won't see any dry brushing at all. So I'm just going to let it sit and I'm going to work on my grain bin. My grain bin, I'm going to put my lightest color on first, which would be like a golden yellow or a tannish color, a wheat color. I'm going to put that on first, nice and wet. And I'm going to just paint the entire mass of horn. I think it's looks like horn. I'm doing it nice and wet because I'm going to add some other colors in there while it's wet. And while it's wet, I'm not going to go in and try to shadow or anything, but I'm going to go in and just add some colors here and there. I'm putting in a little bit of black. I'll put in a little bit of burnt umber, because all of that corn is not exactly the same color. There's some that's been dried already, some that the bugs have eaten already. And so I want to have different colors in there before I start to do any shadow. I'll just allow that to dry. I am going to texture it, but I'm going to texture the second wash. Instead of doing my first wash and then putting another wash over it and maybe losing some of my texture, because this is so textured, I'm going to wait and just do my second wash. So I'm going to go back in now. I'm going to put a little bit of color in the roof to my grain bin, but because it snowed, I'm going to make it look like there's snow up there. So I'm just going to put in a little bit of cerulean blue. I'm going to dry brush it in the direction that that grain bin roof would be going. So it would be straight up and down closest to me, and it would be going out to the left on my left, out to the right on my right, so that it's already starting to look circular, because you can use your paint strokes to help with your shaping also. Okay. Same with my snow on my roof. I'm going to use my lighter cerulean blue, and I'm going to put a little bit of snow up there. Just a little bit. And we want to make sure everything is really dry before we start to go in and do some other things. If you look at those hay bales on your right, there's no sense really putting a lot of color on those hay bales because they're covered with snow. Okay. But we do want to put some color on them. So instead of trying to do the snow, I'm actually going to use some brown, and I'm going to dry brush from the bottom of the bale up, and that dry brushing is going to give the impression of the snow falling over the bale. So on the bottom of those bales, I'm going to go to the very bottom, and I'm going to dry brush upwards. So now it looks like there is snow on the top, and I have some of my hay shining through. through on the bottom. And then I'll worry about the front of it later. This way, just have my little bit of brown in there. And now I'll put my little bit of snow in there on top. And I'll dry brush that down. Try to do one more quick dry with the dryer so that nothing can move around and contaminate each other. I get right back and we'll work on that barn. Okay, now just to give you a better view of what your salting does, this is the texturing that you'll get from your salting, which in something like snow or on old wood or a sidewalk or grasses, that's the perfect thing. Instead of you trying to hand paint all those things, if you just put some salting on, you'll get those nice textures without even trying. So we're going to do the base of our barn first. The base of the barn is a little different in color. If you don't want it to be different in color, it certainly doesn't have to be. But I'm going to put in a little bit of burnt sienna on my base. And I'm going to paint my base in, just so I know what part of my barn is the base and what part is not. It'll make it easier as you go along. I'm leaving my windows for right now. There's a little design. It looks like a cement block. I'm going to leave those also.
Are you using the same brush?
No. I'm using this brush just to, it's a little smaller to do my base. But when I have to do the bigger areas, I will move to a bigger brush. Okay. So you want to learn to use different sizes. Okay. Because that is just going to help you. You know, like I said, you don't want to do your sky with a little skinny brush when you have a big, you know,
Right.
expanse to do. But you also do not want to do something that is really tiny with a big brush. So you want to get used to, you know, trying to use different brushes. You're always going to have a favorite brush. And you'll have the tendency then to want to do everything with that brush. And that is good and bad, because you want to get used to learning how to use different brushes. So even if you have that very special brush that you really, really, really like, it's best if you try to use some different brushes just to see what they'll do, you know, because sometimes when you're painting a bigger expanse and you do it with a bigger brush, you won't get little lines that because if you use a smaller brush, it may have the tendency to start drying because it's a thinner line. So it's not gonna stay wet as long. And then when you go back and paint over them, you get like a double line. And then before you know it, again, on wood, it doesn't matter, but then you're starting to see all of your brush strokes. And you won't get that nice, smooth, all colored surface. You'll have lines that you can actually see. And again, on wood, that's probably not an issue. But if you were doing a piece of clothing or someone's complexion, you wouldn't want those. So you want to try to paint just like you would be, doing anything so that you're doing it the right way all the time. And that's not always easy. So I'm going with this lighter color just for my base. I'm going around that other storage unit thing. I don't have a farm, so I don't know what that is. But I'm sure there's somebody out there that probably knows exactly what it is. I'm not one of them. My upper barn, you can do one of two ways. You can paint the entire expanse of the upper barn, and then with a small liner, you can actually line your boards, or you can paint board by board, allowing them to dry, so that when you paint wet against a dry board, you'll get that hard line and it'll act as your separator of your boards. So I'll do some one way and some the other way so you can see what I'm talking about. So if I was just going to do it as one piece, I'm going to use a bigger brush. And I will paint in this one section as one piece. So that you can see how it works. One piece, not necessarily one color. You don't have to stick with one color, because while you're nice and wet, you can drag other colors through. I'll show you that in a minute. Painted that whole thing in. You can see where you can see your dry brushing through that. Okay? And you can still add additional colors while it's wet. Just drag other colors through. And it'll make it look like there's different boards in there. And then we have to wait for that to dry before we would actually use a liner. Brush nice and fine, like this. See how nice and fine that is. And you would actually paint your lines on for your boards. If you don't want to do that, then we're going to paint board by board. We can't do wet against wet, so I'm going to skip a section. And then I'm going to paint the board. You want to make sure you're nice and straight. And then I'm going to skip. I'm going to paint the board. Skip. And they don't have to be all equally the same, because you know, in a barn, you can have bigger planks, smaller planks, so they don't have to all be exactly the same, but you don't want them touching because you want to create that hard line later. So I'm just painting in some separate boards. And my preference of painting a barn is to do it this way. I like creating my hard lines and creating my boards. I'm going to dry this real quick, and then I'll show you how you can create your boards on both of these ways.
Marci, there's a question in the chat. Marci, there's a question in the chat. Is that umber?
If I can find it. Can you tell me what it is? I can't see the questions.
It is, the question is that umber? It was posted about 2 minutes ago. The boards.
The boards are not finished yet. You're going over your dry brushing. No matter what you do, you're going to go over your dry brushing.
But the question is it umber?
Umber, I'm sorry, I thought you said over.
Oh,
It is
no.
burnt umber mixed with black, and then while it was wet, I dragged through burnt sienna. Okay, so now I'm going to show you again. We've painted this as one single entity, and we're going to use our fine liner now to line the boards. So I'm just using some black, but you could use black mixed with umber. And I'm just going to paint in my board. And again, they don't all have to be exactly the same width. And you would just simply paint in all of your boards all the way across. Now, if you don't want to use a fine liner, if you're afraid, or if your hands shake, or if you've had too much coffee or too much wine, you could use a watercolor pencil and do the same thing. Okay? If, when you are done doing that, if you're, for some reason, your dry brushing didn't work like you wanted it to, or it seems like it's all exactly the same color, then you could go back in and repaint one or two of the boards. But now it's easy because you're just doing it within your lines. And so then you could still change up the color. The ones that you painted every other one, now you're going to go back and you're going to paint that space that you left. And by painting that space that you left, you are painting wet over dry, because you're in between two dry painted lines. And when you put that wet line on, the two dry painted lines are getting a double line on the edges, and that's creating your line for you. So you don't have to go back in and fine tune all those things. That is how I prefer to do it. But again, everybody has their own way of doing it. So you would simply go back and paint in all of your boards. So I'm gonna give you a couple minutes at home or wherever you are. And I'm gonna finish painting in my boards quickly. And then that way we'll be done with that and we can move on to something else. Okay, so you can watch me. Or you can go ahead and just start painting your boards. You can paint it as one piece. Or you can paint it as multiple boards, whatever is your favorite. Or you can do half and half. You don't have to do it all one way. So just for the sake of getting this done. And just to remind everybody, I'm not pushing for winter. Don't. Just because we're doing a snow picture does not mean I want it to snow. I do like October, so I'll be happy just with some colored leaves. And then I'll do this smaller side piece as one big entity. And again, just to show you how we did that piece. Save us some time. If your dry brushing did not work well, and your boards are all painted in and you can't see any of your dry brushing, you can let it dry well, and you can dry brush over your boards. There's no rule that says that your dry brushing has to be done first, and if it doesn't work, oh well. If it doesn't work, you can go back over it and redo it. Okay. I'm not going to waste my time going board by board on this side piece. So I'm just going to paint that in as one solid section of barn. You'll notice that I am painting right through the wire mesh of my feed storage area, because it is wire, so you're going to see right through that. And what you're going to see is the side of the barn. So I'm just painting it like it's not even there. And we will go and make that more obvious later. Okay. Put that in, put this in, because this also is meshing, wiring. And we'll separate that out. Okay, this seems to be nice and dry. So I'm going to go back in now.
Marcy, there's another question in the chat.
Okay,
The question is, what color are you using to paint in the boards?
I'm painting in the boards the same color, umber, mixed with black. You can change the ratio and do more umber than black, or do more black than umber. You can also use burnt sienna, because you want to change up the color of your boards a little bit. They don't all have to be exactly the same. Some have been weathered more than others. Some are broken. So you can change up your colors. So it could either be burnt umber or burnt sienna, or either of them mixed with a little bit of black.
Are they painting at home?
They can, yep. You can watch this from home and be painting right along with me. Or it's being recorded. That's a good thing that you brought up. This is all being recorded, so you can watch it at any time and paint along with the video. There's also videos from all of the other previous classes that we did, and you can watch them at any time. You can watch them, you can repeat them, you can back them up, you can fast forward them. So it's something nice that you can, go back to anytime. Okay, okay, so now my boards are painted. Again, if there's a section that you might not like, or if there's a section that you think isn't dark enough or isn't light enough, you can dry brush over them. Same thing, you would just put some paint on your brush, lay it on its side and drag it down, and you'll just be redoing some dry brushing. Okay, it doesn't have to be done at the beginning and you missed it. Oh my gosh, now I can't do anything else with it. That's not the case. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my little bead thing here. I'm going to paint the underside of my roof. And I'm going to paint that in with watered down black because that's all in shadow. Okay. Let that dry a little bit. I'm going to go and I'm going to use my nice thin rigger. This is another nice thin brush. It's called a rigger or a liner. This is a number 1. And I'm just going to lightly put on my sections. And I'm going to put a nice light wash where my meshing would be, which is here. And I'm going to also put a light wash over my corn mouth or whatever's in there. Because now is when I'm going to put on my texturing. So I'm putting on a light wash on this corn. Not real dark, because I don't want to lose that nice gold color. I want to shadow that up a little bit, and I have to put color on to texture it. I'm going to throw some salt on this. While that salting is working, I'm going to go up And I'm gonna fill in all of the little detail-y things on top of that bin. Mainly just with some watered down black. Nothing special. I'm not real worried about doing a lot of detail here because there's gonna be some branches over there of some trees, so I'm not gonna get real involved with that kind of stuff over there. I do want to paint the base of my bin, because where my base is, only some of the base is showing through. So if you look at your picture, you'll see just some of that base is showing because the snow has gone up and over that base. So I'm taking the shape of that base. I'm leaving that little bit of snow along the edge. And I'm just filling it in part way to make it look like that snow has built up along the edge. And all you're doing with that is just adding color and allowing your paper to, you know, become your snow for you. Okay. I'm going to go back to my hay bales now, and I'm going to put in some umber mixed with some black, and I'm going to fill in the front of those rolls with some color. And I'm going to, after I get that base color on, I'm going to deepen the color at the base. And to do that, I'm just going to put a little bit of black in the base and allow it to move up into the veil. The other one you don't see, so we don't have to worry about that one. Now I want to go back to all of these real faded trees in the background because they're a little bit too faded. I just wanted to get color on at the beginning, but now I want to give it a little bit more detail. Not crazy detail, but at least a little bit. So I'm getting a little bit of my umber and my black. Because this is a winter picture, that's mainly what you see. Umber, black, dark blues. You're not going to be seeing bright reds and oranges and golds. So I'm just going with my umber and my black. And I'm going along the base, or actually the tops of my bins, and I'm dry brushing upward, but that's going to give a little bit more detail to my tree or my trees. I'm going to go to the base of the snow. It's just going to give a little bit more detail, but it's also twofold. It's giving some detail to my trees here, but it's also separating my snow out nicely from that background. That snow still looks like snow, even though it has some browns to it or some blues, it's still looking like snow. We're not done yet. I'm going to get my rigger, which is my nice skinny long brush, and I call it just doodling or squiggling. I'm going to squiggle in some real fine branches back in there in all directions. You're not doing specific trunks and branches. You're just going to squiggle back in there, and that's going to look like all of those nice tree tops. You don't want it to be real dark. You want it to be nice and light toned, because this is all way, way, way off in the distance. it's far away. You're not seeing individual leaves. You're not really seeing individual branches. You're just squiggling so that it looks like there's a lot going on back there. The key too is you don't want everything to be exactly the same height. So you don't want everything to look like a grass cutter just went across the top of it and everything is exactly the same. You want to move your brush around, get some branches that, might be sticking out. Just don't get too carried away. You don't want to take these branches all the way to the top of your page. There's no need to salt or anything back in here unless you maybe got a little bit too heavy-handed and you filled it in too much. Then you could go back and throw a little bit of salt on, and that would break up that solid color that you put down that you really didn't want to put down. Okay, so I'm going to leave that go now. I've done enough with that. I don't want to do any more. I am going to paint in this second storage bin, whatever it is, and you can use any color that you want. I'm going to go ahead and use like a dark turquoisey green color, nothing too bright because I don't want my eye to just be drawn to that. And I'm going to leave the top of it white because there's snow on top. Nice pale green. Now, I want to give the impression of my corn bin. I want to give the impression that it's round. Okay, and so to do that, I'm just going to use my brush. I'm going to take off this salting. I'm going to dry it real quick so I can get good, solid, fine line. I'm going to show you what my salting has done, and then I'm going to show you how to make a round. Okay, so I want to show you first, nice and close. You can see the texturing, hopefully, from my salt over the corn. You can see it in the blackish. You don't want anything too big because these are all little pieces of corn in here. So you don't want any texturing that is as big as our snow texturing down in here. Okay, so now I'm going to show some roundness. I'm going to be putting on some white highlights later, but for right now, I'm going to use a little bit of my watered down black. And I'm going to dry brush from side to side. Instead of vertically, I'm going to go side to side, and that's going to help to show some of the roundness. Okay, so I'm going to go in this direction. And just these pale little lines, your eye is following that. And your eye is saying, well, gee, that is going in a circular motion. So it's just little brush strokes like that that can really show a shape, show a dimension, show a shadow. And it doesn't take a lot. Less is always better. You can always add, but it's very difficult to take off. Okay, so we're going to go back up here. I'm going to deepen the shadow on the inside of my roof to this. Make it nice and dark in there. And then because I've shadowed that, I have to shadow the top to my corn a little bit. I can't have a big heavy shadow and then right below it, no shadow, because that shadow has to extend itself a little bit. So I'm extending it on the top of my corn just slightly, and I'm going to use just water and lessen that shadow and blend it off. But now the top to my corn is just a little bit shadowed, makes it just look a little bit more realistic. I'm going to use my nice rigger, my little rigger. And if you look at your picture, you'll see where there are some nice tree branches in this corner. So I'm going to do some nice fine tree branches over that. Tree branches go in all directions. They don't just go left to right. They don't just go up and down. You have to do nice little fine elbows, little fine branches. And this is where your different brushes come into play. You don't want to use the same brush. I'm switching off now to a tinier brush or even tinier line. I want to deepen this section of my snow just slightly because I want to separate it out just a little bit more from my sky. So I'm going to just put on a little tiny bit of indigo right here. And I'm going to use just a little bit of water. Just to separate that out from the sky, just slightly, but now your eye knows the difference between your sky and your snow on your roof. There's a shadow on the overhang. This is the overhang, but I'm leaving just the edge white from that little bit of snow that might be hanging down. Okay, so we have our overhang there. And we have an overhang here. And all of these things, I certainly don't know from memory, but that is why I give you a picture, because then you can refer to your picture for all of these little details that are so important. Leaving that nice white snow on the top. I'm leaving some snow on this board that is standing there. And now I'm going to go back in and I'm going to start to paint my fence posts. Now my fence posts have snow on them because the way the wind was blowing, there is snow on all of those boards. So if you look at your picture, there's only going to be basically like a half of a board painted, because the other half is where the snow is. I'm going to use my smaller brush so that I can dry brush that board color so that it's not so smooth. And then you can see that the snow is on the other side of the boards. Okay, so we're doing all of our boards. This board is the one closest to me, so it's going to have the most visible detail. And then there are some much smaller boards, much smaller ones. And those you don't have to do all of that little detail to. You can simply just paint in like a half of a post. And they can be wherever you want them to be. If you can't see them in the picture, you can just go ahead and paint them. Because we are going to do some even finer ones with our smaller brush, with our real teeny tiny brush. All of the little details in that you see in your picture, we're going to paint in all of those little details, and they would get painted in with your nice small little brush. Don't use a nice big gigantic brush. Paint all your little details in. We have a window, so I'm painting in the squares to my window, and I'm leaving my window frame white. I'm putting a shadow under that window. My other window down here is totally painted in dark. No light in the barn today. Paint that in nice and dark. The other one isn't quite as dark, but it's also painted in, so I'm going to paint that one in. And that decorative stone on my barn, I'm going to paint that in with some sienna just to give it a little bit of a different color. Some little lines on this. Again, I'm not a farmer. I have no idea what these even are, but they're in the picture, so they must be something. And I'm going to shadow the one side of that. So to shadow that, I'm going to put the shadow up the one side. And then I'm just going to use my water and soften that edge, and that will soften the shadow. And it'll give the impression then that that shadow, as it comes more towards the center, the shadow is lessened. So you have your nice shadow, but yet you just soften that with some water. The rest of this picture is detail work. So I'm going to use my little fine brush. Okay. I'm going to make some little fine lines. And again, if you want, you can use a watercolor pencil. You do not have to use a little fine brush. And I'm not doing it everywhere. I'm just doing it some places because you're not really going to see it everywhere. And we're also going to have a white highlight on this because we want it to look, it's not so much a highlight, it's where the snow has stuck to some of the wiring. Okay, so I have just some fine little lines. I'm gonna do some nice fine little lines on my fencing. And if you look at your picture, there's going to be some weeds that are popping up. And those weeds are popping up through the snow. So we are going to have them coming out of the snow. And then we're going to start working with a little bit of white. Nice fine little brush. And we're going to do just some little fine weeds. These are not going to be done in black because they're so fine. You want to use just watered down black mixed with a little bit of umber. And I'm going to do some coming from the bottom of my paper to look like those are really close to me. Remember too, the smaller the brush, the more you have to keep dipping it in paint. If you're using a brush that has 6 hairs to it, it's not going to hold enough paint that you can paint with it for 15 minutes. So you have to keep dipping in to keep getting paint on that brush.
Marci, I have another question in the chat.
Go ahead.
What size is the fine brush?
This fine brush is a liner and it is a number, it's a number 10 liner. There's also a rigger and this is a number 1 rigger. There's also liners. You have to actually look at them because even though this is a number 10 liner, in another brand, it might be a 1. So you have to basically look at the size that you want. The smaller the number, the thinner the rigger will be. Some of them are actually zeros, and those ones are usually your finest ones. If you're looking for a place for supplies, I always use Artists and Craftsmen on Hobart Street in Squirrel Hill. And they have, you know, all kind of art supplies, not obviously just watercolor. But if you tell them that you are doing one of my videos or one of my classes, they will give you a 10% discount on what you purchase. Yeah, yes, they will. So you just have to mention Marci Mason and they won't throw you out, I promise. Okay, so we have most of our color on there now. Now I'm going to get into my whites. You don't want to do anything with white until you are totally satisfied with your actual picture, because white does not accept anything else on top of it. So you want to make sure that everything is done to your liking before you would put any white on. I'm going to add just a couple more little shadows. So I'm going to mix my indigo blue, my little bit of black, and I'm gonna put a little bit of shadowing along my base of my barn. And also in between my barn, where there's not as much light. And then I'm just gonna soften that with a little bit of water. I'm gonna put some more over here, because I don't want any real white snow there. I'm gonna soften that with a little bit of water. And I'm going to put a little bit, causing a shadow from my feed bin. Okay. Now, if you wanted to show the demographics of landscape, if you didn't want it to look like totally flat snow, you would do the same thing with your shadowing color, but you could actually make it look like a mound of snow. And all you would have to do would be to simply move your brush and create some dry brushing with that shadow color. And what that is going to do is that will make it look like there's a mound of snow right there. And you just created that just with your shadowing colors. But you can change the way that your snow looks. You can add footprints just by tapping your brush, a little bit of footprints. And as I get closer to the barn, my footprints will get a little smaller. So I'm coming from my barn to my feed place maybe, or maybe I'm going for a walk in the woods. You can put footprints, you can do whatever you want. Again, like I said, the very last thing is going to be our white. So I'm going to add some of my white. Do not mix your white with any other color. Do not allow your white to get into any of your bins because it will contaminate your color. And you always want to use perfectly clean water when you're using white, because the white will also pick up the dirtiness in your water. Okay, so I'm going to use a little bit of this white on my bin, my corn bin. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to dry brush with this white. And all this is going to do, I don't want big white stripes, but this is going to give the impression that there is some snow stuck on some of that wiring. Little bits at a time. Not too much. You don't want it to look like, you know, there's a snowstorm that has attacked your bin here. Just a little bit of snow on those wires. And then you can use your liner and actually draw some white lines. They'll be nice and pale. Your white will always dry much paler than it looks. So when you put it on, if it looks really, really white, don't worry, it's going to dry much paler. It'll dry so much paler, you'll probably have to do it a couple times. Okay. Now you have that little bit of white, that's just enough to show that there's some snow sticking on that. The very last thing that you want to do, if you want to do it, is you could actually add some snow that would be flying through the air. And in that case, you just want to use your brush. You want to get some nice white on your brush, and you're just going to lightly tap it. There's no reason for you to tap it in a white sky. You're not going to see it anywhere. So you would just be tapping it over your barn so that you'll get a couple snowflakes. Okay, you don't want to make it look like, again, like you're in a big snowstorm, but you can get a couple little bits of snow. And that'll give you the impression that the snow is flying. And then you can be done. You do not want to do this though until you are sure that you're done. You don't want to try to add any paint on top of your white because it won't work. Okay, and then that will be your finished product. You can, we'll do a picture to put online so that you can see what it's going to look like finished. And we will also, if you have any questions, you can email me, you can call me. All of my information is also on the website. But take your time. Less is always better. Don't get carried away with the snow. If you're going to dab on a little bit of snow or tap on snow, to tap it on, all you are doing is putting some white on a brush and tapping close to the picture. Don't tap from way up above your head or you'll get it everywhere. You're just tapping it so that you have those nice little snowflakes here and there, and then you are finished.